He was born an outcast, literally abandoned on the brutal Mongolian steppe, and yet he would rise to command the largest land empire the world has ever seen. So who is the man behind the fearsome legend of Genghis Khan? Well, let's dive in and uncover the incredible story of how a boy named Temujin became the universal ruler. Right from the very beginning, his destiny seems to have been foretold. At his birth, an astrologer made this unbelievable prophecy. It hints at a life of just unparalleled conquest, a journey that would totally reshape the map of the world. But, a prophecy's one thing. The real story is how a boy born with absolutely nothing would go on to make it a reality. So here's our game plan. We'll follow his path from that prophesied birth, through the insane hardships that forged who he was, to him uniting all the Mongol tribes. Then, we'll get into his wars of vengeance, a huge moment at the Indus River, and finally, the absolutely incredible legacy he left behind. Alright, so to really get this guy, you've got to understand his world. 12th century Mongolia, it wasn't a country. Not at all. It was a fractured landscape of nomadic tribes, and they were just locked in this state of constant, bitter warfare with each other. This is the chaotic world Temujin was born into. His father, Yasuge, he was a powerful chieftain, and the story behind his son's name, it tells you everything you need to know about this world. Temujin was named after a rival leader his father had just defeated in battle. Think about that. It was a tribute to victory, a name that right from day one was tied to conflict and power. But that world of power and influence, well, it was about to come crashing down around him. The single event that would define his entire life wasn't some glorious battle or victory. No, it was a catastrophic loss that gave him a brutal, unforgettable education. When Temujin was just a kid, his father was poisoned by rivals. And then, in this just stunning act of betrayal, their own tribe abandoned his family, basically casting them out to die. All of a sudden, the son of a powerful chieftain was a nobody, an outcast with nothing to his name. And the stakes here could not have been higher. They weren't just abandoned, they were left to face the unforgiving Mongolian winter, where temperatures regularly plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Survival in those conditions, without a tribe to back you up, was pretty much considered impossible. And yet, somehow they made it through.
This whole experience, this whole ordeal, it burned a core philosophy right into his mind. The lesson was crystal clear. Wealth, status, titles, they all meant nothing if you didn't have the strength to defend them. For him, power wasn't about greed. It was the ultimate tool for survival. And that lesson would guide every single decision he made for the rest of his life.
So, with that brutal lesson learned, he began his ascent. But look, this was no overnight success story. We're talking about a slow, 30-year climb from being a teenage outcast to becoming the unifier of an entire nation of warriors. By Mongol standards, he was an adult at 13, and he immediately started playing the game of power, forging alliances through marriage. For the next 3 decades, he lived the life of a warrior and a raider, slowly building his power, mastering leadership, and perfecting these brutal but super effective tactics like the feigned retreat. He just outmaneuvered rival after rival until, in 1206, he did the impossible. He united all the warring Mongol tribes. And in that year, he wasn't Temujin anymore. He was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title that means universal ruler. The abandoned boy was now the undisputed leader of a brand new, unified Mongol nation. Okay, so with the tribes united, Genghis Khan turned this incredible military force outward. But it's so important to understand his motive here. These were not wars of simple plunder, they were wars of vengeance. His first target was a divided China, specifically the Western Xia and Jin dynasties, and you can see their relative territories here. So why them? Well, it was to avenge the execution of a relative from long ago and to punish them for centuries of trying to manipulate the Mongol tribes against each other. By 1215, Beijing had fallen. This was all about settling old scores. And this whole pattern of retaliation, it becomes even clearer with the Khwarazmian Empire. So first, Genghis Khan sends a trade delegation to establish relations. The Shah of Khwarazm has them massacred. Okay, so Genghis Khan then sends ambassadors to demand justice. The Shah has them executed. The response? It was absolute and devastating. The entire Khwarazmian Empire was systematically dismantled.
So the pursuit of the fleeing Khwarazmian ruler brings us to this dramatic turning point. The Mongol army arrives at the banks of the Indus River, literally on the doorstep of what was then the richest land in the entire world.
Just imagine the scene in 1221.
50,000 battle-hardened Mongol warriors, basically an unstoppable force, are just standing there, poised on the riverbank. They've just annihilated one empire, and they are ready to pour into the next one.
And this is the great question, isn't it? India, with all of its legendary wealth, it was just lying there, completely vulnerable. His army was ready, the path was clear. So why, at this moment of ultimate opportunity, why did he decide to turn back?
Well, the answer goes right back to his core philosophy. You see, the Delhi Sultanate in India, they hadn't offered him any insult. In fact, they actually refused to help his enemy. So with his main target defeated and a rebellion brewing back east, his mission was complete. The wealth of India was irrelevant because it was never the goal in the first place. His wars were about retaliation, not about getting rich.
And this philosophy would guide his final years as well. After turning away from India, his focus snapped right back to the vassals who had betrayed him while he was away. Yep, there were still scores to settle.
His final campaign was against the Western Shah, and the reason is so telling. See, they were a vassal state, which meant they were obligated to provide military support. And their crime? They had refused to send troops for his war against Khwarazm. For this one act of disloyalty, their state was utterly destroyed by 1227. The lesson was simple. Loyalty was absolute. But before he could launch his next campaign against the Jin dynasty, Genghis Khan died in 1227. And to this day, the exact cause of his death remains a mystery, adding one final layer of legend to his incredible life. But the empire he built? Oh, it did not die with him. His death set off a complex succession, a process that would shape Asia for the next century. As you can see here, the empire was divided, but his chosen heir, his third son, Ogedei Khan, took supreme command. It was actually Ogedei who finished conquering the Jin dynasty, and it was his grandson, Kublai Khan, who would go on to conquer the rest of China and found the Yuan dynasty, making sure the Mongol legacy would endure for generations.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. While his campaigns were, yes, often brutal, they were not just random acts of violence. They were driven by a disciplined code of retaliation and a strategic vision that looked far beyond simple plunder. The boy who was forged by hardship never, ever forgot the lesson that power, not wealth, was the ultimate prize.
And that leaves us with one final, fascinating question to think about. He stood at a true crossroads of history, with the fate of a subcontinent in his hands. What if he'd made a different choice? What if Genghis Khan had crossed the Indus? The world we know today might look completely different.